Okay, let's see if this is working okay, because my gimbal and internet have had a moment where they didn't necessarily like each other, and I think we still got a minute to go, so I just want to check if things are working right. So if anybody is able to hear this, see me, etc., that would be it would be good to see, because I don't trust it right now. But anyways, hopefully we'll be able to get it going. And right, everything seems to be working there. I don't know if you guys can see me and hear me okay, if somebody can see this, because it's not giving me a reading of either the timing or people. So okay, Zena, I just got your message, thank you. Okay, at least I know that something is working, so hopefully that means all is well. And we're about to get started in here. We have just literally a couple of seconds, properly speaking, to begin, and so that we can do this little tour of Winchester, which we haven't done for a really long time. Okay, good. I'm glad that things are coming through. It's just when I arrived here, my gimbal kind of had an absolute tantrum, and the phone and the gimbal weren't getting along. So I I didn't know if maybe things had completely broken down. But no, this sounds good. Excellent. And well, according to my countdown, we have literally just a couple of seconds to go. And well, it's officially time to get started. So hello everybody, hope that you're doing good, whether you're watching live or watching later. This is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González, joining you from Winchester, from the neighborhood of Hyde, where we're going to be looking for King Alfred the Great. And the reason for this tour is because, well, we've not done it in a very long time. You guys have been asking me to go back to Winchester and see other parts for a long time. So I kind of felt like it was very much due and necessary. So the first thing I'm going to do is we'll get up from the bench so we can start walking and talking. Hey, Adrian, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us. But of course, let me just turn around the camera. So it's not a great, but also not an awful day here in the UK. At least the weather is tolerating us. And I'm going to get us first and foremost to the top of the street. We're going to kind of come down this way in a moment anyways, so that you can understand a bit better about the neighborhood and the overall space, which I think is kind of vital if we want to appreciate how this area developed and how King Alfred ended up over here. So let me just get here to the corner with San Bartholomew, and then I can start explaining things properly. Well, let me do a slow turn around, and here we are. So this is the parish church of San Bartholomew's here in Winchester, which is, by the way, a Church of England. So this is an Anglican church currently. And it's one of the two buildings, properly speaking, that remain of what was, once in a lifetime, the Abbey grounds of Hyde Abbey, one of the perhaps most important abbeys that we had here in the south of England, and that sadly, well, doesn't exist anymore, as you're going to find out. Well, this is, I was going to say small parish church. The reality is that it's not really small at all, but not as well attended as it used to once upon a time. It only provides services now on Sundays at 10 a.m., so it's a relatively small neighborhood church. But when San Bartholomew's was actually built in sort of the 12th, 13th century of the Middle Ages, well, we actually believe that there was probably foundation here a bit earlier in the 11th century. This was not actually in Winchester itself. The neighborhood of Hyde was actually a kind of village on the outskirts of Winchester. And then this kind of got incorporated into the area of Hyde in the 13th century properly, when the Abbey acquires the church itself. Now, as you can see, it's a weird church because you can very clearly see where the church used to be, the main hall, and then the tower that has kind of been kind of glued onto it in a very sloppy way. Well, that's because these two different sides of the building were created at different moments in time. While the hall is indeed what remains of the Middle Ages, and although it's all been restored in the 19th century, the bell tower that you see here, which is the function that it actually fulfilled. Hey, Catherine, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us. So this bell tower was actually done with remnants, with essentially the leftovers of the Abbey itself. So this was pretty much just added here towards the end of the 16th century. But like I said, a lot of this has been quite heavily renovated in the 19th century. Now here we have the parish cemetery, although like I said, this is quite a sort of small area. We don't get as much influx anymore, but it's a very, very serene kind of parish church. And in fact, in here you have a very, very interesting little bit of architectural feature, which is the original Norman entrance to the church itself. It's lucky because it's been pretty well preserved, because this porticum, if I take a couple of steps back, you're going to notice the porticum goes over. This, by the way, is our traditional flintstone here in Hampshire, which you're going to notice a lot of our monuments, the church included, is what it's normally built in. But here you can see that the age of the church does not betray it. This is very obviously Norman architecture, like I said, from originally 11th century, most of what we see, the 12th century proper development of the church. And it's actually in a pretty good state of conservation, because the porticum that it has over it, well, it has helped preserve it a lot from the on the sort of outside. And people waiting on the old stream, oh, so it didn't actually connect with the stream that I had planned. That explains everything. So I thought something had gone weird. So okay, thank you so much everybody for making me aware of that. And yes, now I can see everyone. That's so strange. I think there must have been some, like I said, there was a weird connection issue on my end, so my apologies if that didn't properly kick off as it should. But I'm glad that you guys noticed and were able to make your way here, because I was not aware that's what was happening. So hi, Mike and Nathalie as well, Tish. I can see you all here, and thank you so much for making your way here. Yes, I'm doing very well, and the day is actually quite pleasant. So what I want to do is first and foremost go now to the back end of the church, and thank you, Tish, that's much appreciated, so that we can actually see a couple of very important features which will help us understand the church better, and that will put us on the trail of King Alfred, because, well, I told you that we were going to talk about King Alfred. So far I've just talked about the very lovely church of San Bartholomew, but Alfred is the main event. And well, as you can see, this is a very clearly defined grave, unlike many of the others that we have in here. I don't know if you can read the text, but it says, here lay the remains of 5 individuals who lived between the 12th and 15th centuries and were originally buried in Hyde Abbey. Hi, Laurie, thank you so much for joining us. Well, the situation in here is the following. When we found this grave, we didn't actually know originally who it belonged to. It was very obvious that the skeletons were old, and we thought that maybe, just maybe, we had finally found the original burial grounds for King Alfred. Well, spoiler alert, I've already told you that the 5 burials in there were from the 12th and 15th century, so obviously too old to be King Alfred's. In fact, well, it says 5 individuals, if I remember correctly, is 4 bodies and a partial one, added on top. Hey, Ronnie, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you're doing good. But yeah, when we did the carbon dating and the analysis of the osteoarchaeology, it was very obvious that although the bodies were medieval, they were, well, definitely several hundred years older than Alfred. What we're pretty confident, though, is that although this may not have been Alfred's burial, it's definitely people that continue his legacy. And I'll explain that just now. Hey, Joy, thank you so much for joining us, and the same to Los. I'm very sorry that whatever glitch happened, because I think there was some kind of this connected issue on my end. So thank you so much for making it, and of course for everyone else to point out the tour was here. And well, the situation, like I was saying, is the following. The Church of St. Bartholomew's was built in the Middle Ages as an outskirts part of Winchester, but then later incorporated into the Abbey. St. Bartholomew's was very important during the Middle Ages because this was part of a trail of pilgrimage that was created between Winchester and Canterbury. In fact, a very similar trail still exists. Hey, Linda, thank you so much for joining us. And yes, no, like I was saying, there has been some kind of issue with the connection today. I thought I had launched the tour, but obviously it launched a new thing on its own. So that's why everybody has been confused, myself included. But anyways, like I was saying, this trail actually still exists. It's called now the Trail of the Three Castles. Obviously, in the Middle Ages, it wasn't that. But the idea was that, of course, Winchester is a very important place because of the cathedral and, of course, because of King Alfred, and all the way to Canterbury, which is the archbishopric. A fair few shrines are found. So originally, the purpose of this church of St. Bartholomew's was to be one of those pilgrimage stops. And in fact, from here, from the back of the church, you can, I think, appreciate how all of those little kind of nooks and crannies were originally, the little altars and shrines where the church actually kept the different goods that came to be venerated and worshipped. That's also the reason why it looks quite funny in terms of its architectural design. When I told you that this was originally created as a Norman church, you're probably thinking, well, this does not look like Romanesque. Indeed, because it's kind of gone through the motions. And of course, then we have the add-on in there from the Tower Bell, much later from the sort of period of the Tudors, and then of course all of this was redone in the 19th century. So the original main features and general look of the church has changed a lot. And that is why we thought Alfred could be buried here, because you see, when the Normans take over England, and Winchester was the capital at the time, we know that the old areas of the Minster, the Old Minster and the New Minster, were brought here, because Winchester Cathedral is nowadays built in the area where those other churches are. So all the remains, all the graves were actually moved and put in the area of Hyde. So we thought maybe from the Abbey itself, they had been moved back here. Instead, what transpires is that we're relatively confident that instead these burials over here, the 4 skeletons and the 5th partial one, are most likely members of the congregation that kept the pilgrimage site alive and that continued King Alfred's traditions. But sadly, no Alfred so far. Hey, Lethargy, thank you so much for joining us. And well, Adrian, I'm glad that you had that resource handy, because otherwise I suspect this would have been a lot more awkward for everyone. Well, we're just gonna leave this small courtyard now in St. Bartholomew's. I'll turn around in a second so you can see the church from the front, particularly those of you who have just arrived, because it's quite a lovely church. And well, I'm also biased. For a very long time it was my parish church, so I used to come here very, very often. But this will all make sense in a second. So if I turn around roughly here in the corner, we should be able to... There we go. So that is the front of the church itself, and then the back that we've just been to. So, like I said, you need to imagine that for a long time this was a separate church, then it gets incorporated into the Abbey, and in general that this whole area of Hyde was not part of Winchester, it was a village outside of Winchester, and that's precisely while the Abbey is moved here. The Normans couldn't really afford to have somebody like King Alfred in the center of their capital. It kind of looked like asking for trouble, if you see what I mean. So as a result, that's why they bring it here, close to Winchester and in an area of pilgrimage, but not right in the city center. Well, this is Hyde Gate, which is actually all that remains, properly speaking, of the structure of the Abbey itself. This all dates from the 1100s, if I remember correctly, the first decade of the 12th century. And well, a warning, because I really don't know exactly how well this is going to be seen on camera, is not in the greatest state of conservation. The problem that we have in here is the fact that, I'm sure you all can see it. It's very, very abandoned. For a very, very, very long time, this was an area that was very much used by drug users, drug deals. It wasn't very well sanitized, and we have a very serious problem with the pigeons. Even though all of this area has been completely netted over, I don't know if you can see the several pigeons that are over there. It's quite a mess. And thank you, Linda. It's much appreciated. Well, how does this end up in such situation? And more importantly, what was the origin of the gatehouse? So, if I take a step backwards once again, as you can see, we are literally just away from the church. You have here remains of a wall that used to completely enclose this area. And then this was the gatehouse that you got not into the abbey itself, as in not into the main church, but into the many dependencies that abbeys, monasteries, etc. had back in the day. So this was essentially the gatehouse that you would get to if you were a guest. And in the case of people potentially visiting both Hyde or St. Bartholomew's, a pilgrim. So you would come here, knock on the door, and hopefully the lovely monks would take care of you. And yes, thank you so much for that. And like Ronnie says, much appreciated. Well, the map of the area has been vandalized recently, so we're gonna have to, it's not too bad. They've attempted to clean it, not very successfully. But I'm just gonna put my finger on the map so you guys understand where we are. So you see that it says we are right here in the gate. St. Bartholomew's was right there, and as you can see, the street that it goes all around it was a separate complex before the church gets incorporated into the abbey itself. So the gate actually gave entrance to this courtyard where we had things like, I don't know if you can see, the bakery, the almoner's house, the guest house, the mill. So this is what a lot of the monastic community essentially engaged with different activities that could also provide them an income from ordinary people and travelers. And although it was part of the abbey, it was separate from then what is the monastic compound. So the monks didn't live here, they lived in this area. So you see what the abbey used to look like, which was actually a very, very large abbey here in the south of England. Then they had some fishing points, and overall, this is how things develop. So as you can see, we've lost a massive complex, all because of the dissolution of the monasteries. So, partially because of Alfred the Great and many, many other kings after him, but well, Alfred kind of creates that pretense to begin with. The area of Hampshire is going to be particularly badly affected by the dissolution of the monasteries because, well, we had many. And of course, when Henry VIII decides to finance that very expensive divorce and other issues that he had planned to develop, he needs to take that money from somewhere. And as such, that church is very heavily targeted. And we kind of come quite bad out of it because not far away from here, we also have the lovely Romsey Abbey. Romsey Abbey managed by some miracle to be spared, but of course Hyde had been an important site of pilgrimage for a long time, had a lot of money, so it's gone. Now across the panels you see like different bits and pieces. Those are the few archaeological remains we've been able to salvage from this community. Why? Well, because there is actually going to be a further problem here in the actual site of Hyde. So as you can see, the state of the ruin itself is not terribly appealing. But the situation is the following, and I'll give you also the back view of the gate itself. Well, in the 1700s, because like I said, this was on the outskirts of Winchester, this was all completely gone. Part of this half buried and forgotten about. And as a result, the city of Winchester decides that they're going to bring the prison here to the outskirts of the city. In fact, they actually had the prisoners digging their own facility, and eventually, boom, they start finding these little remnants of what the abbey was. And at that moment in time, it could have been rescued, but the council and the general local authorities sort of turned a blind eye to what they found and decided to abandon the prison project and never mind paying any attention to the site itself. So it's kind of been abandoned, found, and then abandoned again many times over history. And we know that normally means buildings like this that had already been vandalized and left, forgotten as a result of of the Reformation don't tend to endure very well. So as a result, here in the back, I don't know if you can see this kind of celled area, we have, and you're going to see it very clearly, some other remnants of the Abbey, whether it's bits and pieces of walls, of tombstones, etc. But as I'm sure you can see, they are completely destroyed and taken over by the pigeons. So one of the main problems we've had in recent years to kind of try and save Hyde and any of the archaeological evidence is that, I'm sure you guys know, bird detritus is incredibly corrosive. It's not the greatest friend to our health either. So getting into digging these things and actually obtaining anything useful from them is very difficult. And that is how, little by little, what once was one of the most important abbeys in the south of England was essentially just left like this, completely abandoned. Now, the gate itself, the church, and what I'm going to show you now is mostly now kept alive by the locals, because the people that live in this area of Hyde actually know what is underneath their grounds, which is the remnants of the old abbey. However, that means that, since it's pretty much like a neighborhood project, if you see what I mean, they haven't always gotten a lot of resources to get things going forward. Before COVID, there used to be a volunteer kind of dig that happened in this area almost every year during the summer, which was very nice because it allowed us to recover, artifacts every so often. As you can see, the area is very bucolic and clearly historical, but kind of run down. So this is pretty much how we've been able to preserve what little is, and I appreciate it's not a lot. But what is left is of clear importance for its community. Well, as you're going to notice, though, the heritage is also remembered in many other different ways. As we go down the roads, you're going to see that here we have Saxon Road. We're literally just walking down a street called King Alfred Place. Then there is going to be another road named after King Alfred. So references to the legacy are there, but the legacy itself is forgotten. Besides the area that we're walking towards, which is the Memorial Garden. Well, what you need to imagine is that right now, the very same road and this row of houses that I'm walking past would have been the main sort of aisle of the Abbey, because this was quite a big building, I must insist. Let me just get out of the road to let this car park. So to some extent, at least we can get an idea of the dimensions, because, well, it's just been coincidental that things have turned out this way. Now, as you can see, this is Elswitha's Terrace, which is the name of the wife of King Alfred. And, well, like I said, the locals know what it is in here. In fact, it is quite common that when people move to this area of Winchester or they own property in here, if you want to do anything like in your backyard, even put a shed, whatever, you need to obtain a very complicated permit from the council, because, well, otherwise you don't know if you're going to find archaeological remains or something else. Well, you can suspect that you're very likely going to find archaeological remains, because most of us know that is the score, and as a result you cannot just go with a digger and bring things up. You need to do things with a little bit of care. And good, Laurie, I'm glad that it's coming through well. Despite the glitch connection, my internet provider and my phone have really improved things, so I'm glad that this is improve the experience, and certainly will help us in the tours of the future as well. So anyways, like I was saying, there is archaeological material underneath our grounds, but the thing that is most important for the community now is this area. So first I'll show you the new plaque, because I'm glad that at least they changed this, because this one was also vandalized. So as you can see, this is the Abbey Garden. We are, again, I'll put my finger in here, you're here, we're right there. This is the area that used to kind of be the core of the Abbey itself. And what little remains of the outline has been sort of recreated with this garden. Well, is there a lot of it left? No, but at least the creativity of the people and the glass panel that was designed by Tracy Shepherd is going to help us bring this alive, which is better than nothing. So, people always think, oh, well, then what's the point of doing this kind of half-done projects where there is actually nothing left at all? Well, it's either that or letting the history and its memory be lost completely forever, which I think that's not necessarily the way we want to go. But all of this project was originally started by the Friends of Hyde Abbey, which were actually a neighborhood organization. They were just locals until, well, eventually the council sort of got involved, probably more because they felt they had to more than they wanted to. So this is the memorial garden itself, which is allowing us to sort of recreate what you see here on the glass. Now, I don't know if with the light, the way it's coming down, you can see it very clearly, but this is the sort of recreation of how this area would have looked like with that beautiful Norman Romanesque architecture and sculpture. And of course, the 3 marked graves, which I'll talk about in a second. So what you're going to see is that the pillars that we see here in the engraving have now been recreated by the sort of metal and tree compositions. Then we have the outline of the actual building itself by the I'll say it, by the flintstone around it. And then we have the ladies' chapel easily delineated. So let me bring us here so that you can see on the ground how we've done that. I think it's quite a creative use of doing this. So as you can see, this would have been obviously a pillar location for the Abbey and another pillar location for the Abbey, etc., etc. You can see the flint goes all around it, creating the apse and the head of the church. And well, this is essentially how it all comes together. Then, as we go through the sides, and I'm going to try to do this without trampling over the flowers, which are actually coming through and being quite nice. With the use of these hedges, they've created the radial chapels. So, again, it's a way of sort of trying to keep the historical memory while creating functional spaces for the community, which is a very beautiful thing. I'm sure you can tell, though, that there isn't a lot of people around in here, and that's not because it's, 2:30 p.m., nearly 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. It's because legitimately, unless you're a local, you don't normally come down this side of town. And finally, over here, past what would be, as you can see, this is the outline that would say this is the sort of altar, and here, the area with the square hedges is what would have been the Ladies' Chapel or Mary's Chapel. And that is kind of where the end of the church would have come to. Well, if I take us one trace back, you're going to notice that I sort of ignored for a second these 3 graves. Now, as you see, they're clearly marked, but one thing you're going to notice, as I focus on this one in the middle, is that there is no name. And that is because we have a slight situation in here. We know that King Alfred, his wife Elfrida, and their child, Edgar the Elder, were actually buried in here. The problem is that when we've gone and done our archaeological digs and analysis of the area, we've not actually found the bodies. And as much as we may know that from the point of view of record, we can't exactly confirm who is who, or if the exact spot where we've put the stone slab is actually where the burial would have been, if you see what I mean. And why is that? Well, even though we know the Normans brought the burial here, even though we have the records of the Abbey, etc., 2 things don't go in our favor. The first one, the dissolution of the monasteries will leave this completely ransacked. And that means that any remains, etc., were already damaged and exposed. And secondly, I don't know if you can tell, because it's a bit difficult with this light, but part of the ground is wet. It's not because of the rain, although it's rained recently in Winchester. This is mostly because this area of Winchester has a tendency to flood. That's because the River Itchen, and some of you that have toured with me in Winchester would know this already, the River Itchen was diverted by the Romans, and well, the flooding is quite severe. So as a result, a lot of this area has been given the worst possible opportunity for archaeology to survive, if you see what I mean. The fact that Alfred may have been buried there indeed, nearly 900 years ago, nobody contested. But whether Alfred could still will be here in this very spot that I'm showing you right now or not, that's a very different story. The likelihood of the scenario is that, well, Alfred either was completely looted and destroyed during the dissolution of the monasteries, or that through the flooding the bones completely dissolved or were damaged, or overall they simply just moved. And that is why, although I can tell you this would have been their final resting place, I can't exactly confirm, yes, 100% underneath this piece of soil, King Alfred is buried. He's certainly here in spirit, if you see what I mean, but the evidence are lacking because of that. And sadly, this is a very common problem in archaeology. Yeah, I know, Ronnie, but it is a very common issue. Just because we know something was buried here however many hundreds or thousands of years ago, it does not mean it's still there now. Archaeology, and when we find archaeological remains, is often a matter of being lucky. I'm not gonna lie. You just got lucky, you found the discovery of your career, and you should be patting yourself in the shoulder, because often what we find is entirely circumstantial and coincidental. So that is unfortunately the sad tragedy of King Alfred, a hero of his people, moved here to an area that was supposed to be able to preserve his legacy. And once again, I show you from here how the reconstruction of the Abbey would have been. And unfortunately, between the dissolution of the monasteries, the general situation of the area, which is half abandoned, the fact that Winchester suffers so badly after the English Civil War is not going to help either, because many parts of Winchester that were growing are once again going to be desolate. So that would apply to Hyde. It's now a neighborhood of the city, but like I said, back in the day, it was literally the countryside. And that's how, things that matter so much for people, for nations, for history, can just be left, as you can see, like this. Now, the million-dollar question is this of value? Is there a reason why the council aren't getting involved? Well, I guess it depends who you ask. I think for the locals and for people who genuinely want to do their part to keep places like this alive, it's very important to at least have something, right? Particularly since we take into consideration that, for example, in the UK, a lot of heritage laws that we used to have were EU laws. Now with Brexit, we have a general gap in some of those situations. And I think anything that we can do at a local level to preserve anything we have of our culture is important. But of course, not everybody is going to necessarily agree with me. At the end of the day, I'm a historian, and I'm very much all for local history. So this is where the conundrum, when the conundrum happens, and where we have these issues. But the locals are very, very much involved in this, and it is because of their constant, banging on about it, that finally some recognition has been given to the area. And I think the pillar thing is cool. And yes, they do indeed resemble gibbets a little bit, which perhaps is not the best look in that regards. But well, like I said, it's one of those things. The other problem that we've had in here is that a lot of the archaeological excavations, started literally not that long ago. The first proper successful community excavation, which is what you see represented in here, is the one from 1999. So we're talking that this was really a project that started barely 20 years ago. So it requires a lot of people to get involved. The University of Winchester, where I studied, actually had a lot of people involved in this project as well. But again, as you know, the way that education is going in many countries, we have a lot of cuts, we have a lot of issues cooperating with projects that should be of importance to us. So things kind of just get a bit abandoned and a bit left out. But well, I think it's a very important part of Winchester, even if it's just for the fact of knowing what eventually happened to Alfred. When Richard III was eventually found underneath a car park, everybody in Winchester was like, we're gonna dig up all of the car parks in our town and we will find our king too. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen. But there has always been that hope that we would eventually, properly be able to find him for good. And well, I think the community's always been a little bit sad that all we have left is that memory. So hanging on to that memory is all we really can do, and attempt to preserve it the best possible. But it's also a very beautiful example of what can happen when local communities pull together to bring something back from darkness. If the neighbors wouldn't care about their history, if they didn't have any interest in preserving their own, that garden would have never happened. And without the garden, I promise you, the gatehouse would have already been pretty much torn apart to build more houses, because this is a very affluent area of Winchester, by the way. We're talking of very, very wealthy people living in here. And well, I think you can tell with some of the houses in here, the ones that are historical from sort of late 19th century, late Victorian to Edwardian period, the new cottages being built. This is one of my lecturers lives in this part of town, and he's the only person that could afford to live in Winchester up until recently. So you get the idea. But well, that is pretty much the hunt concluded. I'm sorry if it's a little bit sad and disappointing, but sometimes history is that way. However, I thought I would give you one final view of the gate itself, and then of course of Bartholomew's Church, which actually with the springy feeling is looking quite lovely. But if you have any questions, any comments, of course, feel very free to drop them in the chat. But I hope, if nothing else, that's given you the courage or the ability to understand the importance of keeping alive our very own heritage. I'm sure there is something like this similar in many of your neighborhoods and homes. So I guess my message for the day is, fight for that history. Even if it's a very, very small fragment, it matters because it's your history. You should take care of it. And you should not let people who would rather let it see it rot take it away from you. Because once we lose it, it's very difficult to bring it back. If the people of Winchester could rebuild Hyde Abbey in its splendor, with that beautiful architecture, with all that power, with all those monks that created so many books, so many artifacts of value, I'm sure they would love to. And well, maybe Winchester would receive even more tourists. But well, it's not necessarily something that they can do, because now there are houses over there and we don't really have the money for it. The river is eating half of our city. We can barely fix that problem, let alone bring anything else in. And since we are here, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, there's lots of daffodils coming around. Of course, it's approaching Mother's Day here in the UK, and in case you don't know, it's quite traditional in England to actually have daffodils given as a present. Is the season for them as well, of course. And this looks rather lovely now. So at least spring, as you can see, is making its comeback. And no, thank you guys. I very much appreciate you taking the time, particularly at a moment of the day which I appreciate is probably not very convenient for everyone, to actually give Alfred and myself a little of your time. And again, just to listen, because I have these conversations with myself all the time. One person is not really going to change anything, but as you saw, the whole community here got together and actually were able to do something. So that's also to demonstrate the power that we have as people. When we come together, we're capable of very beautiful things. So I hope that's being useful, better than hanging the wallpaper. I am very, very glad that that's the case. And well, this is what I shall love you and leave you guys. I hope that you have a very lovely rest of your day. I am gonna be adding a few more live tours on YouTube and otherwise. Hopefully, we will not have this problem of connection one more time. But in any case, I'll keep you posted. And that's pretty much it. I hope that no palaces or castles, sorry. But if we get lucky, because I need to test the signal, I'm gonna be able to take you to some very, very lovely places in the next few weeks, including Romsey with its beautiful abbey that actually survived. So I'll see you soon. Take care and have a lovely rest of your week. Bye bye.